And welcome back to the Doris Davenport Show with Doug Wyman. My name is Doris Davenport. I'm your host. We just had a great conversation with Provide Chicago, an organization that's doing great things. And I tell you, there are so many other things you're going to be hearing from those young people. I'm excited about this next segment. I want to welcome back to the program, Mr. Tom Tresser, the guru of tips in the city of Chicago. He is the founder and COO of the Civic Lab. Tom, how are you? Welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks, Doris. Thanks for bringing me on, and hope you are well. And
I'm doing well.
Watching us tonight are well and safe
Yeah.
in their humble abodes.
In our humble abodes. Well, Tom, let me ask you, we've got an hour to talk about this, and I'm excited about this conversation. There are so many things that, believe it or not, as long as you've been advocating for TIFs, there are still many people who, one, don't know what TIFs are. Two, if they know what TIFs are, they really think they're working. And three, a lot of people really do think Chicago's broke, even though that book behind you says it's not, that you wrote. That's with right. Natalie Moore.
That's right. We say it's not broke, and there's reasons for it, but yes, absolutely.
Why don't we start with the definition? What does TIF mean?
Well, I should say, yes, I guess I am known for my obsession with tax increment financing. But really, I should say that I'm a civic educator, and my dedication is to get people's hands on the steering wheel of history and current events so that they can pitch in and guide their own destinies and their community's destinies, as I think is the ideal blueprint for America, where we're supposed to be in charge. And in order to do that, we need information. I think the founders, as flawed as they were, had this vision that a democracy is only as good as how smart we are and how informed we are. And so I've dedicated myself to getting information out and giving people the tools so they can have critical thinking and have some basic facts to decide whether we want to go this way or that way, when it comes to major things for our city and country. And in order to do that, we feel people have to know where the money is. So a lot of things in the world of social justice and community change comes down to money. And many's the time where an organizer or a group of parents or a group of people from a community will go on a campaign for something. Sometimes it's just a stop sign in front of a housing project because children are running across the street, to big picture things like a trauma hospital, a trauma center, class 1 trauma center on the South Side that would be responsive to African Americans on the South Side should they be in the need of those services. So it could be a little thing, it could be a big thing. And oftentimes the leaders will say to the organizers, who go to great expense and great effort to bring their case, to say, you know what? We feel you, organizing parents, organizing activists, but we had no money.
But we had no money.
Yeah.
Now, I know that for people who are really interested in trying to find out even a little bit about TIFs, if you're a property owner and you pull out your property tax bill, there is an itemization of the different types of taxes that are taken out of the property taxes that go into the city. Some go to education, some go to the library, some go to special service areas, taxes, and then there's that tax increment finance.
Yeah.
And tell us now how back in 1986 and why our first African-American male mayor, Harold Washington, why he started tax increment financing in the city of Chicago.
So, there's a little context that's needed first, and that is, a city is a living thing. It's designed by policy, but it's also idiosyncratic, and people move hither and thither. And the market is only partly responsible for how the city looks, because the city has been designed, a city like Chicago has had a lot of racist and what I would call prejudicial public policies placed on it. So that if you were an African-American person moving into the city in the 20s or 30s or 40s, you might have had money to move wherever your heart desired, whatever you wanted, a big house, you wanted a little house, but there were restrictions. So these were things put on the city, on the geography by politicians and enforced by the banks and other entities. So the city, as we are living with it today, is the product of 100 years of these bad policies. First, there were redlining, segregation, blockbusting, predatory lending on people. And so these are designed things. So someone has to think it up, codify it, and enforce it. So it's not like magic, you know what I'm saying? TIFs, tax increment financing, is another one of these things thought up by the city, placed on the geography, which now has very real financial and geographic implications. So this is a chart of the TIFs of the city of Chicago.
Wow. Okay. And so there's a lot of colors there. So help us break through those color codes.
Yeah. So every different piece of color is a different TIF district. So you can see they're spread all over, and some are quite large and some are quite small. Each one of those districts is a legal entity created by the city and operated by the Department of Planning and Development, which is a cabinet level department. And of course, the mayor, in this case, Mayor Lightfoot, chooses the commissioner. So you can say that all the TIFs are things created by the economic development and are responsive to the wishes of the mayor.
And who's the commissioner? Who's the commissioner?
The commissioner is a man named Maurice Cox. He's an African-American man. He came to us from Detroit.
Detroit?
Yes.
And he came here to do something good? Yes.
Well, he's a very creative man. He used to be a professor and scholar he's an architect.
Is he creative in spin or creative in solutions?
Creative in solutions.
Oh, good.
I know him. I've actually talked to him over the years. He is deemed quite a creative, a thoughtful practitioner. And so he was brought here by Mayor Lightfoot. He's I think maybe 9 months or something into his tenure. So he's new. So that's you could say a good and a bad thing. Someone who doesn't know the city could be just a front, you know.
Well, and easily duped.
But Mr. Cox is yet to really make his mark here. I would say it's taking a while to get the lay of the land. However, back to your question of how do TIFs work, just keeping in mind the context of the city as a built environment where people have been doing nasty things, you know, public policy things. So the TIFs are an attempt, and it started, as you said, under Howard Washington, to steer funds to where development was not in the past. So we have this term called blight, a blighted community. Now, it's a very controversial term, and I would say a loaded term, and you might want to stop and have a conversation about who blighted who, right? Because that's what I'm kind of alluding to, that the conditions of our cities are not accidental. But putting that very tough conversation aside for a second, the statute, which is a state statute, says, I'm going to give you a menu of 13 factors, like a menu. And it's a city thing. So the TIFs of one city don't touch the TIFs of another. So if you, city of Chicago or city of Evanston or city of Springfield, want to create a TIF for your purposes, you must prove that the area that you wish to work in is blighted. According to this menu, you have to have 5 of the things off the menu. So if you can take 5 things, and there's a little form, you know, so that there's actually a consultant that does this kind of pro forma work. It's kind of like a TIF industrial complex.
Right.
So they would hire one of these firms to do the assessment of looking at all the properties. And so what is one of the terms? Well, code violations. So
Mm-hmm.
you might say, like, I kind of understand. I'm not an architect, I'm not a planner, but I kind of would understand what a code violation would mean. Could it mean like too many people living in a house, or is it like
Mm-hmm.
unsanitary? There's rat droppings.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I think about it.
Right.
However, it's so flexible that when they made the LaSalle Street a TIF district, maybe 10 or so years ago, cracked sidewalks were able to satisfy that condition of blight. So
I
now,
guess that's how a downtown area, which is like the Mag Mile. I don't even know if there is a TIF there, but that's how they would
not
get
on
TIF
Mag
money.
Mile, but close by, LaSalle
Mm-hmm.
Street, the Central Loop was a TIF for many years under Mayor Daley. The South Loop
Mm-hmm.
remains a TIF, and the West
Mm-hmm.
Loop in Greektown remains a TIF. So excessive vacancy. So again, you may say like, oh, if I walk around a community and there's like vacant lots
Mm-hmm.
or storefronts where there used to be a business, now it's all boarded up. I kind of understand how that would be a mitigating factor. However, again, in creating TIFs where there shouldn't have been a TIF, if that office tower is only 70% occupied, we're going to call that an excessive vacancy. So let's place a TIF around this whole area. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we think this is a failed policy for
So
that.
and this kind of tells me how in politics, as in anything else, you can take a word and just really create anything you want out of it. I mean, I'm hard pressed to look at the word blight and find a positive meaning in it, even though you can look at it, whether you use it as a noun or a verb, there are different definitions to the word, but what's common among all the definitions is the negative connotation of blight.
Yeah.
So you can take that word and use a crack in the sidewalk to build a whole new Lincoln Yards project.
Yeah. So you mentioned a specific mega project that's happening in my part of Chicago, a white affluent part of the city, along the river and Armitage. So right now there is vacant land there. It used to be a steel mill owned by the Finkel and Sons. And for 100 years, they melted steel and made things, and it was a foundry. So there was trucks coming and going, and stuff went into the water and stuff went into the land. I mean, it's a very polluted site. Sterling Bay, the developer, bought that whole area and plus a few more properties. And they wish to build a mini city there of, I don't know, a couple of thousand people maybe. And the architecture looks, the little drawings look like they're like multiple skyscrapers and, sort of vague renderings of high-end retail, with
stores.
all these wonderful little drawings of people walking dogs and whatnot, in these little renderings. It's like, I think it's the same art firm makes these renderings. Whenever you see these fantastical things, everybody looks like they're having a great time. Everybody looks obviously very wealthy.
And usually in all the renderings, the people are white.
Yeah, there's one black guy, walking a dog or something.
Surprise,
but yeah,
surprise.
It doesn't look like any neighborhood I've ever experienced. But anyway, that's the rendering of Sterling Bay's Lincoln Yards. And for that project, they're going to get $1.1 billion subsidies through the TIF at Cortland and the river. And
let me ask you this question before you go on. It was
1.1 billion
now,
total.
My understanding is that Sterling Bay, or the people who own and who are behind Sterling Bay, are already multimillionaires. I mean, did they need this money to complete this project?
No, not in my opinion. One of the principals of Sterling Bay is a gentleman named Keating Crown, whose grandfather Lester is a billionaire industrialist. I believe the Crown family is one of the principal owners of General Dynamics, which is a military contractor. They make drones, amongst other things. But the Crown family has been a prominent family for 100 years. There's a Crown wing at the Art Museum. There's the Crown Space Center attached to the Museum of Science and Industry. So these are one of your Uber families. These are one of the families that actually own part of the city. And so now the grandson, who's a billionaire in his own right, is a principal in this venture called Sterling Bay. And they have placed heavy bets in the West Loop, and they're very, very successful. And they're very hot. They're super hot. And and to answer your question, Mr. Crown could finance this out of his own pocket. He didn't even need a bank loan, really. I don't, the family could do it around dinner.
Right.
Say, yeah, here's son, here's $2 billion, go build your city. Anyway, because they did. And they would say, look, you're being too harsh, because we're going to widen the streets. We're going to build a bridge where there was no bridge. We want a new metro station. We want these things that are going to be needed to make this project work.
I always thought that back in the day, when you would see Walsh Construction, Pepper Construction, gosh, I could, name a whole lot of them, where you saw their names literally on cranes all throughout the city of Chicago. Now, and the competition was so fierce, and I'm talking maybe 20 years ago, the competition was so fierce that not only did you see all these names, but part of how they were chosen and selected was not always based on the lowest bid, but whether they would include that kind of infrastructure that was needed in the project. The city didn't pay for it, the contractor paid for it.
As far as I know, I can't claim to be quite an expert on all aspects of development, but I did a little research, and it is true that in other parts of the country, when someone is building a very big project, and there is no street or a sewer, they will run the sewer, not the city, not the municipality. So certainly we have that option. Chicago has had that option.
We don't always use it.
And if it's our custom here to say, well, if you're going to build something so big, we, the city, will help you out by building the bridge. And, that's our choice. And I'd be stupid not to take it. So, because building bridges is expensive. And so what we say at the Civic Lab to Mr. Crown and his friends is build whatever you want to build. You buy the land on the open market, put up a skyscraper a mile high. I don't care. Charge $1 million a room, fine, go with God, but don't take my money. We need it for other things, for the public's benefit. And it's not like we have a lot of money lying around. And we're in COVID, we're in a health emergency. So this is extra important. Black and brown people are dying 5 and 7 to 1, depending on where you go. And so this is a matter of life and death. We can't be giving Mr. Crown, this is over the life of the deal. It's not all one lump sum.
Yeah. And for me, this is not a political conversation for me, because I want Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of the city of Chicago, to be absolutely wildly successful. I want her administration to be the best administration, that we end up talking about her as a legend, as affectionately as we speak about Harold Washington. Whether that happens or not, I think is totally up to her. Now, clearly, she stepped into an administration, never in a million years thinking that she would be governing in the midst of a pandemic, a global pandemic. So we get that. But pandemics don't give passes to TIF reform. That's why we have so many people working in an administration, so that when her eye is on this, somebody else's eye can be on that. And you can, delegate and check back frequently. But I do have to talk a little bit about the politics behind these deals, because when we look at 2019, there were, I think it was something like 140 active TIFs at that time. And it was at the very tail end of the Emanuel administration that he pushed these 2 TIFs through. That Lincoln Yards project and what is it, Carter 78? Down 78. By the old post office.
Yeah.
And I don't think they've even broken ground over there. I think it's kind of just sitting there. But the point that I want to make is he pushed them through, but Mayor Lightfoot had a choice of whether to actually seal the deal.
Yeah.
And even one of the first things she did when she got in was to express great surprise that the city was in debt to a much deeper degree than she said Rahm Emanuel had led her to believe, and we the people. Knowing that, she still pushed these through, and I'm curious to know what the financing cost of those deals were. So on a $1.3 billion subsidy, what did we pay We the people pay in financing.
Yeah, so first to your point about the timing. Yes, this was pushed through in the last hours of the Rahm Emanuel administration. And it should be noted that the two aldermen who were in charge of these deals, one was Danny Solis, the chair of the zoning committee, and the
Is
other
he?
is Ed Burke was the chair of the finance committee.
Are both of those men under indictment or
Solis is not.
some investigation?
Danny Solis wore a wire for the FBI for 2 years.
For 2 years.
And so he disappeared from view. He didn't show up for work for the last, say, couple of months. But for most of the time when the Lincoln Yards and Project 78 TIFs were created, thought through, maneuvered, he was in charge. So he's corrupt and will probably go to prison. And Alderman Burke, who is by many accounts one of the most corrupt politicians who has ever lived in the city of Chicago, a multimillionaire, is under indictment, and I'm sure will be heading to prison within the year. Well, Ed Burke, was the tax lawyer for Sterling Bay until it was revealed how corrupt he was, and they fired him. Another law firm connected with Sterling Bay gave $6,000 to Alderman Brian Hopkins, who is the sitting alderman where the TIF is. So the whole thing is corrupt from start to finish. All right. So, but Mayor Lightfoot would say, I wasn't the mayor. I'm not disputing anything you're saying, Tom. I don't like any of those people, she could tell you. So stop bothering me. I wasn't the mayor, except the mayor has so much power in this city. She could have said, and she said things so close to it. She says, I don't like this deal. I'm not the mayor. I request that you, the city council, do not vote on it. That's what she said. And now we're talking about early April of last year.
Okay, wait, Tom, back up for me, please. Can you just give us a backdrop of Inauguration Day and why that is important to this conversation?
Well, because when she was inaugurated back in May,
I was there in the audience.
This is like a month later. She said, the day of the TIF slush funds are over. She got a
turned around.
Huge applause. And she said, turning around, facing the aldermen who are being installed right behind her, she said,
like a Pentecostal choir director.
Yeah, she said, in the days of making personal profit from your public office are over, and she was looking right directly at Ed Burke. Well, and she got a huge standing ovation.
I couldn't see who she was looking at, but when she turned around like a Pentecostal choir director and said that, I think I stood up and said, amen.
Everybody stood up.
Yes.
It was the biggest response moment from her, from her address. However, a month before that, she had this opportunity and she requested that the vote be delayed. And at that point, James Koppelman was the chair of the zoning committee. And another alderman who lost his job, O'Connor, was the chair of the finance committee, both machine regulars. And it looked like they were going to listen. So they postponed it. And I thought, this is news. This is amazing. But then they said, we're going to have the, we postponed it. And so what we understand happened is then Mayor-elect Lightfoot met with the Sterling Bay developers and extracted some more goodies from them, so that the number of minority or women-owned business slots would go up, and the number of affordable housing units that would be created as a result of this deal went up. I think she just said, look, I don't have the power, and I'm not going to waste my political capital before I'm even the mayor. Like what could she have done? Could she have just said, this deal sucks. This is a terrible deal. And to answer your other question, with $400 million of financing fees per TIF.
Per TIF. Per
TIF. So it's two deals, it's $800 million in financing fees. That's pure profit we're going to give to Wall Street. That was known at the time.
Good Lord.
Yeah, that was known at the time. That alone should have been enough to say, let's go back to the drawing boards on this one, guys. Now, if she had said that and saying, okay, you guys are going to vote on it, fine, I can't stop you. I'm just going to tell you, the day I'm in office, I'm going to tear it up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to send it back to the drawing board and go do me something. And in the history of Chicago, the aldermen have never said no to the mayor.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
is that how you want to start your, I mean, that's her call. Now, at the time, on that very day that the vote was happened, there were 7 aldermen-elect in the streets protesting.
Mm.
And they were marching behind a banner that said Chicago is not broke.
My goodness.
They didn't credit us, but we'll take some credit for it. But anyway, that's a long-winded answer to your question about the politics. So now Lori Lightfoot has blessed the deal, and we say it may have started under Rahm's watch, but now it's yours.
Well, let me ask you, Tom, if I look at all of these TIFs that we have in the city of Chicago, what I'm interested in knowing is how much of that TIF, so if I think about it as, what did I say, 190, what did I say, 138 TIFs now active?
140 TIFs that we looked at for 2019.
140. Now the group that looked at it, it's the Tax Illumination Project, is that right?
Yeah, the TIF Illumination Project is a project of the Civic Lab, and we're a complete nonprofit grassroots do tank that looks at civic justice and grassroots democracy.
I like that, do tank, not a think tank.
Yeah, not a think tank. We do
think. Y'all get stuff done. Yeah.
we want to act.
How many public sessions did you hold in order to to gather all the information that you gathered?
Well,
and share it with the public.
This whole thing started back in 2013 when we did a public meeting at the Chopin Theater over on Division Street, and we were looking at the TIFs of the 27th Ward. So this is the piece that we published that night. So it was printed for us by the University of Illinois Program on Civic Engagement and Policy. And
hold it up, hold it upside right up.
So part of it explains what TIFs are. So this is the reverse, and we can talk about that. But basically, you could sit there in the laundromat or whatever and read this and kind of get it. But the heart of what we were offering is a look at on a ward by ward basis.
And that's what I want to focus on, because I want to know a breakdown of how many Black and Latino wards, and not just. So Tom, one thing you know about me is I'm not, even when I say Black and brown, or I want to know the Black number and then the Latino number, because grouping them together is not a real true reality of what's happening. So yeah. Can you give us that breakdown?
So as I say, so we started all this back in 2013, and we wanted to try to figure out what we think this is important. It's a big deal, but as educators, as civic educators, we're trying to wrestle like, well, how would be the best way? What would be the best approach to come into a community and talk all this, ABC, TIFs, and so the first decision we made was to do it on a ward by ward basis, because that's how people sort of live politically.
Yeah. And
so if I asked you, how are things in Roseland, or how are things in Chatham, or how are things in Uptown, people say, oh yeah, I'm from Uptown, I'm from Beverly, I'm from Lawndale, or wherever, and they can kind of figure that out. How's the community? Lincoln Park, is it doing well? People can give you an answer, but there is no political person in charge of that. But if you say, how are things in the 13th Ward? Do you live in the 15th Ward? Do you live in the 20th Ward? Yeah, people can locate themselves politically, and there's someone in charge.
Right.
So that was the decision. We live on a very local political basis. So we said, okay, we're going to first of all try to decide to explain TIFs on a ward by ward basis for this reason. So on that night, we explained the TIFs of the 27th Ward, and we explained how TIFs work. We explained how much money TIFs have taken from the ward. We explained projects funded by TIFs and a few other things. Now, that was in 2013. You asked how many meetings we've done. We've done 80.
Ooh, that's thorough.
80. Almost every ward we've been to multiple times. And that led to the book that we can talk about in a minute, Chicago is Not Broke. Done 68 meetings about the book. And every year we sort of pull the TIFs apart and we come up with something that looks like this.
Wow.
This is my sophisticated data analysis tool.
I love it.
A
Oh,
giant spreadsheet.
wow.
And over the years, we have teams of volunteers attack the TIF reports, and these TIF reports are about 40 pages, and they're rendered as PDFs on the city's website, and they're very hard to manipulate. You usually have to open them up, suck the data out as we have, and put it on a spreadsheet. So we've been getting help from the City Bureau, a group that is led by African Americans that does deep journalism and civic reporting. And they've been helping us these last 3 years. So all hats off to Daryl Holiday and the good people at the city.
I know Daryl, and he does a very good job, I have to say. And I don't know if people really understand that. Even when, you know, candidates are going through the petition challenges at the Board of Elections, and Daryl Holiday does a good job all the way around. He's always looking for the right thing, the moral right thing.
So people can check him out at citybureau.org. They do a lot of original reporting and a lot of collaborative work with other, like ProPublica and the Sun Times and so forth. But over the years, we have triggered volunteers, including Daryl's crew, to help us with this work. So we mine these PDFs to give you the bottom line. So for in 2009, as I say, 140 TIFs, they stole or lifted $684 million in property taxes.
Well, all right. So you taught us tonight that TIFs were were enacted here in the city of Chicago to help blighted communities. Now, we get that word blighted has been distorted over the years and used for all kinds of immoral, in my view, ways. How is it that today in 2021, that TIFs are not being used for blight, but on the other hand, are contributing to the inequity and all of really the persistence of poverty in the very areas that they were created to help?
Well, again, we'll just show you this little graphic here. You can see the rapid rise in TIFs.
Yes, this one right there, yeah.
A dramatic increase. So in the early days, it was just sort of muddling along, not being very successful or impactful. But when Mayor Richard M. Daley is elected in 1989, you start to see this huge, increase right there.
Yeah.
So we think someone inside Mayor Richard M. Daley's shop understood this thing very well and used it to juice up the machine. And so you start to see hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars flowing to these wealthy developers for projects in the Loop, the South Loop, the West Loop. And in return, those developers would give tens of millions of dollars into the Democratic machine's coffers to Mayor Daley's own campaign or the Hispanic Democratic Organization, HDO, or other machine-friendly ward organizations. So even in years, like I'm remembering 2007, Mayor Richard M. Daley faced no real opposition. He still had $7 million in his campaign war chest. And with that money, he was able to fund down ticket races. So this is how the machine evolved and continue to have a stranglehold in Chicago politics. And remember, in Chicago, when an alderman leaves office prematurely, which is usually a euphemism for being arrested, our mayor has the power to replace that alderman, which is extraordinary.
And Emmanuel got a chance to do that quite often.
He did, and we haven't seen that from Lori Lightfoot yet. But when that happens, like for example, if Alderman Burke is in fact convicted, say it happens mid next year. You know, his trial is supposed to start. Well, it was postponed because of COVID, But whenever his trial is going to happen, he leaves office. She will have the power to replace him. That would be like, can you imagine, like under Obama, a conservative Republican from Kentucky dies in office, and Obama picks like a black woman state legislator to replace him. They didn't lynch him. They'd impeach him. They'd go crazy. They'd set the house. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But for here, we don't think anything of it. So by the time Mayor Daley left office, he had appointed 26 of the 50 aldermen. Now, many of them got reelected on their own right, but you can understand how loyal people are.
Yeah.
If on the one hand, you put me in office, and on the second hand, because you have so much cash in your fund, you're printing my literature, you're buying my radio ads, you're paying for foot soldiers to go pass literature. That's all from you, Mr. Mayor. I will never do anything to piss you off.
Now, you're talking about loyalty. If I look at the numbers that you sent to me, and when I look at those numbers, I think about the contribution made to the TIF overall bottom line by these Black wards and Latino wards, but I'm going to stay with the Black wards for now.
Yeah.
Many of those aldermen are Black. Are Black.
Yeah, you asked, can we get specific? So for the first time we can. And so by our analysis, at the beginning of 2020, there was $1.8 billion of property taxes sitting in the collective TIF accounts. So we're talking about a pool of almost $2 billion. Of that, 46%, or about $820 million, came from the 18 Black wards. So the answer is 15 white wards contributed about 569 million. 13 Latinx wards contributed about 309 million. So you're in terms of the percentage of the population, of Black folks are not the majority of the people who live here, but they are the majority of people whose money is sitting tied up, if you will, captured, handcuffed, if you will, in these TIF accounts, waiting for the mayor's whim.
All right. So we just looked at the contribution made by Black wards, and we know that there is kind of like a three-card Monte game that goes on with the TIFs. TIF money gets moved from one ward, diverted to another ward, and oftentimes they're diverted from the Black wards that need them the most and Latino wards, and they're put into other major projects. What is the total amount of dollars that have been diverted from property taxes to TIFs at the end of 2019?
Well, let's see. The TIFs move money in three ways. They just outright spend it, so then it's gone for projects that the TIF is funding. But then they also move it, as you say, from one TIF to another, and that was $160 million. And then money can also be just distributed, like it's like a holiday. We're just going to take the money out of the TIF and send it to the units of government that should have gotten that money in the first place. So if you look at your property tax bill, as you mentioned earlier, so I say I have $1 in property tax. It's generally understood that about 56 cents of that dollar goes to the Board of Ed, 20 cents goes to the city, and so on. I think 3 cents goes to the parks and whatnot.
Right.
So when money is distributed, and it happens kind of magically, we don't really know what triggers it other than the mayor's will, the money must be distributed in that way. So if you take $100 is distributed in this hypothetical situation, $56 would go to the Board of Ed, so forth. So $95 million was distributed in that way. So basically, a total of $255 million of the total that was collected. And remember, I told you the total collected was $684 million.
Right.
So the total amount collected by all the TIFs was about $684 million. Of that, about $255 million, or 37%, was moved around. So we have a skim job, or a scamming, or a skimming like you see in Vegas, the mob, the mob, you trust the mob to operate your casino, Doris, and you call your pit boss and say, Tom, what kind of night did we have? And I go, oh, boss, we had a great night. We took in $1 million. I'm going to put it on the plane. You'll have it the next day. And you go, hot damn, $1 million. I love being a casino operator. But the truth is, Doris, I took 1.2 mil. And
wow.
I put 200,000 under the mattress.
Wow.
We're not going to tell you about that. So the skim is like that. The TIF takes the money off the top. And then inside that, we have another skim going on where money is moved around, again, according to rules that we are not privy to.
And here's why I can't help but be a bit political about it, because even after the announcement on Inauguration Day that this would no longer be a slush fund, what we saw the mayor of Chicago do very soon after she was elected, because she said that she didn't realize or didn't know that we were in that Chicago was in as deep debt as they were, but she did know, or I don't know whether she had already approved those two TIF deals and the financing, but she took $300 million out of that TIF fund for the budget.
This is the TIF mayonnaise jar.
What is that?
Well, to your point, Mayor Lightfoot is now in office. She now has access to the books.
Hey, but that's a craft jar. It's not real mayonnaise. They use the word, but it's not real if it's not Hellmann's.
Yeah, that's right. Well, as you say, when she had access to the real set of books, she announced that there was an $830 million deficit. Right, that she's inheriting. So in her budget address of last October, before the council, she described that and said, here's how we're going to combat it. We're going to save money over here. We're going to refinance over there. And I'm going to go into the TIF mayonnaise jar. And this is according to her staff person. We scraped the TIF mayonnaise jar and took $300 million out. So last year, our total was 1.5 billion. So when we did our report a year ago, the TIF total sitting was 1.5 billion. So that's what she knew coming into office in early May 2019, that there was the total TIF accounts held about 1.5 billion. So she went into the TIF mayonnaise jar and scraped out 300 million of tasty TIF mayonnaise and applied it, smeared it, if you will, on her budget sandwich to make it palatable and balanced. And we said, that is great, Mayor, keep going. There's another 1.2 billion of mayonnaise in the TIF jar, keep going, keep spreading, and this is way before COVID. We just thought at that time in October, we've seen enough. This is a racist program. So we, Doris, at the Civic Lab, that's myself and my CEO, Jonathan Peck, a long-lived African-American educator and activist. We've been in this work for about 50 years between us. We looked at all the research. We reflected on all those 150 meetings that we've done through the TIF work and the book work. We talked to friends in other cities, other activists and housing people and social justice activists, people fighting TIFs in many cities. And it's just one bad story after another. And so we took a look around at what people were offering as reform movements, like, we can fix it here or tweak it here. And we said, no, this is a flawed program. It is racist at its nature. And so we call for the abolition of TIFs at this time. Right.
And I look at, so I seem to, everybody is drawn to something or something's drawn to them. And I tell you, when you think about this law of attraction, I want to learn the law of unattraction because I get the getting tickets. That's what I get attracted to. If I put money in the meter, or now they don't want you to use cash, you got to use a card. 2 minutes, 1 minute after it's done, if I'm not back, there's a ticket on my window. And after the extensions had expired for tickets, and Lori Lightfoot put them back in place, that's when I said, I'm getting back on this stuff because I'm not going to be victimized that way if that administration is not doing their job. Now, we keep seeing regressive taxes. We saw them in Pritzker's budget. We see them in the city. We see service cutbacks continue. They were under Rahm Emanuel too. We see them now. And I want to know, is Chicago really broke?
Well, we say no, plainly. The teachers union used to say it's broke on purpose. You know, that's a different way of talking about some of the same issues. So let's just say, let's deal with your complaint for a second before we get to the answer to your question.
Please.
So when you are the victim of these regressive taxes, like we call them the red light scammers, which hurt Black communities a lot. I've been in churches where there've been all kinds of preaching and you know, all kinds of sermonizing, and people get very, very angry. It takes it personally, and they should.
Yes.
People have been bike riding while Black and been ticketed. The booting also follows hard upon, and people have been going into bankruptcy. So not only, again, a legacy of our racism, this stuff is hard to escape. So it's regressive and racist. So when you're hurting the little guy, when you're putting a soda tax and a bag tax and a tax on your internet and your cigarettes and on and on and on.
And now COVID-19.
Yeah, that's the latest. That's a death tax on you.
Yeah.
Because you don't have stuff.
Healthcare and
you're
all of these generations of underlying conditions.
It's the absence of that leads to the high mortality rate. So so people are tired of this kind of nickel and diming. They know it's not right. They don't necessarily have the words. They just know this is wrong. But the economics would say, as I think you used the word, it's regressive.
Yes.
So Illinois has had one of the most regressive income taxes for decades. And one of the things I do like about Governor Pritzker is he's trying to get a fair tax passed, which would be a progressive income tax, which means the rich pay a higher percentage. So if you're poor, if you're very poor, you may pay zero income tax. And that's progressive and it's considered fair. So that's not what we have in Chicago. So you have all these crappy things and they hit the little guy, and we also do expensive debt. So Chicago, because we are corrupt, and because Mayor Emanuel was from the banker class, and because Mayor Daley owed a lot of favors to the banker class, we've done a lot of bad deals, which encumber us, you and I, paying off heavy, expensive debt. And so the meter deal, which I think you referenced, is an example of going to the payday loan store.
Yeah.
Which is essentially what Mayor Daley did. He took out $1.1 billion in expensive debt. He spent it in about 15 minutes. And in return, he gave our meters to the financial concerns of Morgan Stanley
for 75 years.
And they have just paid themselves back.
It's criminal.
They're even. So all that's the background of why we say this is true.
Right, right.
So the book, you can get the book at civiclab.us or wearenotbroke.org. And you can see it's a slim volume. It's not a heavy load. And what it is, it's a series of short articles in which we try to explain why we feel so fundamentally that the city is not broke. And we explain it in this way, that there are three large buckets of money. And we think this is a good way to have a conversation with folk, you know, in the neighborhood, and people understand this intuitively. This is not above anybody's pay grade.
Right.
The first bucket is money we should not spend. It's a waste of money, you know. So let's not do stupid things, you know, to waste good money year after year after year. So what do we mean by that? There's three sections. First, corruption. So you already know where I'm coming from on that. I believe that we are a very corrupt city. We're opaque, we're arrogant. It's hard to do justice here. Well, there's a cost to that. And our authors explain that. And what's different about the book is we ask them to put a number on it. So we understand aldermen are going to prison. We understand we're giving the contract to the lowest bidder. not the highest bidder. We're giving contracts to incompetent people who then bungle it, and then we have to redo their work. We know that we have ghost payrollers, which means someone is on the public dime, not doing the job, which means someone else has to come,
Or we budget for one project amount, knowing that at least another 50% is going to be in cost overruns.
Right. So we hear these and we kind of get dead to it. Well, what is exactly the bottom line? And our authors came up with a number of $500 million a year. And they back it up. So that's the first one. The second one is the cost of police violence, which is a very sad and recurring feature here. And we're going to have to update that chapter because it was $680 million when we published 4 years ago. It's now double that. So every year, we can't seem to control police shooting people in a not a good way. They get sued. The trauma, obviously, is, you can't put a number on the trauma to the family or to the loss of life, obviously. But there is a number that you can pay on legal costs and settlements. And then the other piece of this first section is bad bank deals. And we've already talked about one, the meter deal, but there are many others. So that's kind of how we go. We just had these little short chapters. The second part of the book is money that we are collecting, but you just can't find it. And that's my section. That's the tips. So I get a chance to go off on tips a little bit. I explain how they work. But again, it's the same thing. If we just got rid of the tips, we'd have that $600 million that I mentioned would be in our budgets. And it would be, everybody would get a little more, instead of what they get. And the third section of the book is money that we're not collecting, but we should. So this section of the book is about civic imagination. And we're all about civic imagination at the Civic Lab. We believe people should expand and be generative, and, generous in their thinking. And those are three ideas as well. The first is a progressive income tax for the state of Illinois. So we definitely are behind that. The second is a financial transaction tax on LaSalle Street. So when we do these talks in the community, I usually take the flip chart and get a volunteer to write a 1 and then 18 zeros. So I get this 1 with all these zeros, and I ask the audience, can you name this number? Can you?
1 with 18 zeros?
Yeah.
No.
Take a stab.
I'm not even going to try.
Take a stab. What do you think?
Oh my. 1 gazillion. I don't know.
It's right. It's a bazillion, obviously.
It's a bazillion.
It's like, so really, unless there's a mathematician in the audience, nobody really knows. The answer is quintillion.
Oh, a quintillion. Oh.
Okay. Oh my God, that's a big number for sure. And the reason why we have it on the board is because that's how much money is run through the LaSalle Street Stock Exchange every year.
But now, we've heard the stories that a lot of people say that financial transaction tax is one that we should use more, but they say that how much truth is there to what is said, that most of those transactions occur outside of Illinois. So the tax that we would get would be low.
These are all transactions on our exchange.
So in Illinois.
These numbers are off of the numbers from down LaSalle Street.
But they say because it's digital, it's in some,
Well, they can claim that, but it's like buying something on Amazon. I'm in Illinois. It could be that the server that Amazon is using is in, Kansas. I don't. But the sale is here, and Amazon knows very well where their sales come from. The authors of that book are 2 professors of economics, and they, speculated on, well, what if we just put $1 fee on the buyer and seller of all those trades, because they trade like every 5 seconds is trades. I mean, that's one of the reasons why it's such a high volume. So we just ran the numbers, and just to have a start of a conversation, if we just took, if Chicago, the city of Chicago, just took a percentage of that total gross, commensurate with the percentage of people who live in the city of the state. So we would get our percentage of that, the rest would go to the state and some of the, we would get about $2.5 billion a year.
Wow.
Just from that one fix. Now, of course, the people from the exchange say, if you did that, we're all going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what they always say. Business
That's what
doesn't
they
want to be
say.
taxed.
Right.
You know, but it's like if I go to the Jewel and I buy mayonnaise,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you pay a tax.
Right.
It doesn't hurt Jewel. I mean, it's not like Jewel is suffering. Jewel just has to be inconvenienced that they're like collecting my 6 cents or whatever, holding it somewhere, and every year or every quarter, or whatever, they got to send a bunch of money to Springfield because they sold 10,000 bottles of mayonnaise. That's all.
Wow.
That's all we're saying to the exchange.
Yeah. Now
And
listen, we've
they're
got
saying,
about,
oh, everybody's going to run away, and
yeah, they've got the same old story. We've got about 2.5 minutes left. The time
oh,
flies.
they
I
do.
want to ask you a last question, and everyone, this is Tom Tresser we're talking with, who is the COO and founder of the Civic Lab. Tom is someone who's not a stranger to you all. He's been around for a really long time. He was co-founder of the project of Protect Our Parks, and that was a group that fought to they sued to stop the privatization of Lincoln Park. In 2009, he was a co-organizer of No Games Chicago. And of course, you all know that was against the Olympic bid that Chicago spent so much money on for 2016. He curated and published the book he just spoke about, Chicago is Not Broke. And that's where they triggered those 66 public meetings. He also co-founded with his current partner with the Civic Lab, Jonathan Peck, the Power Institute. We'll be bringing Tom back to talk about a number of things. My last question to you, Tom, for a brief answer is, of all the research and work that you've done on TIFs, I went online and I tried to make heads or tails of exactly where the TIF money went when it was pulled out of this account and what it was spent on. And I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Why have you never advocated for transparency? And what kind of transparency are we looking at now? Because the administration said we can expect transparency.
Yeah. Well, you know, for me, transparency in a corrupt place like Chicago is a little, I don't know, I have to laugh a little bit. It's like if there was a, oh, I don't know, a stick up at a gas station, and there was a little security camera, you know how they go with the grainy footage, and you see a guy with his hands up, and you see there's a gun and there's money. Clearly something bad is going on, but that was 2 weeks ago. The money's still gone. The crook is long gone, and the safe is still unguarded while that camera plays. That's what transparency means in like Chicago. We say enough of that. Abolish TIFs. Go to www.endtifsnow.org. Sign our petition. Join our campaign. Call your alderman. Call the mayor. Tell them to release the TIF money for immediate relief in our Black and brown communities. Folks are dying. They can find out information at civiclab.us.
Wow. I want to thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure talking with you, and I cannot wait to have you back again. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.